The city air bit with the tooth of winter, a cold that seeped through the thickest wool coats and settled deep in the bones. But on the heated terrace of Le Ciel, insulated by walls of invisible glass and the silent deference of starched white staff, it was merely an aesthetic. A backdrop of glittering, frozen lights against which power could dine in comfort. At the most secluded table sat Min Jun. His suit was a whisper of dark, tailored silk, his posture an unyielding column of authority. Before him, a piece of steak, perfectly seared, lay untouched. His gaze was fixed not on the plate, but on the sprawling metropolis below, a kingdom of concrete and light that he commanded with an iron will and a network of shadows. He was not a businessman in the conventional sense. He was a force, a name spoken in hushed, fearful tones in the boardrooms and back alleys of a city. The Korean Mafia had many arms, but Min Jun was its unblinking, calculating mind. His men, positioned discreetly at the edge of the terrace, were statues of loyalty and menace, their eyes scanning everything, protecting the cold vacuum of calm that surrounded their boss. Tonight, that calm was a thin sheet of ice over a deep, familiar emptiness. A multi-billion-dollar shipping acquisition had been finalized, a rival crushed without a single overt threat, yet the victory tasted of ash. The clinking of crystal, the murmur of the city's elite, it was all just noise. A hollow echo in the grand, desolate chamber of his life. He had built an empire of fear and fortune, but lived alone within its gilded walls, the warmth of human connection a forgotten, foreign language. His world was one of transactions, of leverage, of assets and liabilities. Love, family, they were vulnerabilities he had long ago excised from his personal balance sheet. He lifted his wine glass, the deep red liquid swirling, a captive storm in a crystal prison, a reflection of his own soul. Into this sterile, controlled environment, a splash of impossible color appeared. A small girl, no older than 9, wearing a simple, bright orange dress that seemed to burn against the muted tones of evening. It was a cheap cotton dress, slightly frayed at the hem, a jarring note in the symphony of quiet luxury. She had somehow slipped past the formidable hostess and the subtle cordon of Min Jun's security. Her steps were small but certain, her eyes wide with a mixture of fear and a strange, unshakable purpose. She navigated the maze of tables, her gaze locked on the one man who radiated an aura of absolute, unassailable power. The other patrons, draped in jewels and couture, paused their conversations, their forks hovering midair. A collective, silent gasp rippled through the terrace as the child came to a stop directly beside the Korean Mafia boss's table. Min Jun's bodyguards tensed, hands moving instinctively towards hidden articles beneath their jackets, but a subtle, almost imperceptible shake of Min Jun's head froze them in place. He did not turn. He simply continued to stare out at the city, his profile carved from granite. The little girl waited patiently, her small hands clasped behind her back. The silence stretched, thick and heavy with unspoken questions. The biting wind seemed to find a crack in the terrace's defenses, swirling around her small frame. Finally, she spoke, her voice clear and small, yet carrying with impossible strength across the suddenly silent space. "Can I eat with you, Dad?" The word, Dad, landed like a grenade, shattering the frozen tableau. The other diners stared, aghast. Min Jun's men looked at each other in utter, undisguised shock. This was a breach of protocol, so profound it was almost surreal. Their boss, a man whose personal life was a black hole, a man no one dared approach without being summoned, was being called Dad by a lost-looking little girl. Min Jun remained motionless for a long moment. The city lights blurred in his vision. The word echoed in his mind, not as a question, but as a detonation. Dad. A title he had never considered, a role he had deemed a weakness, a complication he had meticulously avoided his entire adult life. He could feel the weight of every stare on the terrace, the frantic, silent panic of his security detail. The logical, ruthless part of his brain, the part that ran his empire, screamed at him to have the child removed. She was a security risk, a distraction, an anomaly that needed to be corrected and erased. His jaw tightened, a familiar precursor to a cold, swift command. His most trusted man, Mr. Park, took a half step forward, ready to intervene, his expression a mask of apology and concern. But the command never came. Instead, something ancient and forgotten stirred within Minjun. He finally turned his head, his dark, piercing eyes landing on the child for the first time. He saw her properly now. Her skin was the color of rich earth, her hair braided in neat rows. Her eyes were large and brown and held no guile, only a desperate, earnest hope. And in their shape, in the slight curve of her brow, he saw a ghost. A flicker of a memory he had buried under a mountain of profit margins and power plays. The shock that held the terrace captive was nothing compared to the seismic tremor that went through him. Everyone expected a dismissal, a cold glare, a clipped order to his men. They expected the fearsome mafia boss to act like a fearsome mafia boss. Minjun opened his mouth, and the first words he spoke in response shocked everyone, most of all himself. "Of course," he said, his voice a low, gravelly sound, devoid of its usual chilling authority and replaced with something unnervingly gentle.
"Seat.
What would you like to eat?" He gestured with his chin to the empty chair opposite him, a chair no one, not even his most senior lieutenants, ever dared to occupy. The little girl's face, which had been tight with anxiety, relaxed into a small, relieved smile. She pulled out the heavy chair with a determined scrape and climbed onto it, her small legs dangling far above the floor. Mr. Park's face was a study in disbelief, his professional composure completely fractured. He watched as his boss, the most feared man in the city, signaled for a waiter. The waiter approached, trembling slightly, his eyes darting from the formidable mafia boss to the small child in the orange dress. "Bring her a menu," Minjun ordered, his tone leaving no room for question. Then, looking at the girl, he asked, "Do you like steak?" She nodded enthusiastically. "I'm very hungry," Minjun's gaze softened almost imperceptibly. "Then you will have the best steak they have. And a warm apple juice." He gave the order, and the waiter scurried away, eager to escape the bizarre, high-stakes gravity of the table. The meal that followed was an exercise in surreal tension. Minjun did not eat. He simply watched the girl, whose name he learned was Amira, devour the steak with a focused intensity that spoke of true hunger. He watched her small hands, how she carefully cut the meat, her brow furrowed in concentration. With every small movement, every glance from her wide, innocent eyes, the ghost of the past grew stronger. It was Chloe, his ex-wife, the woman he had loved with a fierce, possessive passion that had ultimately driven her away. He saw her in the curve of Amira's smile, in the stubborn set of her chin. He had met Chloe when he was just beginning his ascent, a whirlwind of ambition and danger. She had been a ray of light, a painter who saw colors in his world of gray. But his world was toxic, a place of secrets and violence, and it had poisoned their love. She had left him 10 years ago, disappearing without a trace, leaving only a short, tear-stained note begging him not to follow. He had honored her wish, encasing his heart in ice and burying her memory. Until now. "Where is your mother, Amira?" he asked, his voice quiet. Amira paused, her fork halfway to her mouth. "Mommy told me to wait for her. She said she had to go talk to a man about some papers. She said if she didn't come back, I should find a good man to help me." Her simple, trusting explanation sent a chill down Minjun's spine that had nothing to do with the winter air.
A man.
Papers. It sounded less like a business meeting and more like a desperate transaction. He had to know more. He would not leave this child, this impossible link to his buried past, to the whims of fate. He would take her from this place, and he would find out the truth. The journey to his penthouse was a silent one. Amira, her belly full and her immediate fear assuaged, had grown drowsy in the heated interior of the armored sedan. She leaned her head against the plush leather, her small hand still clutching the napkin from the restaurant. Minjun sat opposite her, the vast space of the car feeling both immense and suffocating. He watched the rhythmic rise and fall of her chest, the way her eyelashes fanned against her cheeks. This small, breathing creature was an anchor, pulling him down into depths of emotion he hadn't visited in a decade. He was a man who dealt in certainties, in calculated risks, and predictable outcomes. This child was a variable he could never have anticipated, a ghost from a life he thought he had successfully erased. His penthouse was a monument to his isolation, a sprawling space of glass, steel, and polished marble high above the city. It was cold, minimalist, and immaculate, more art gallery than home. The only color came from the city lights that bled through the floor-to-ceiling windows. As Mr. Park held the door, Minjun carried the sleeping Amira inside. She was impossibly light in his arms. He laid her down gently on a vast white sofa, the bright orange of her dress a defiant stain against the sterile monochrome. He found himself hesitating, then walked to his bedroom and returned with a dark gray cashmere throw, draping it carefully over her small body. The act felt alien, yet deeply instinctual. While the child slept, a fragile island of innocence in a sea of power, Mr. Park worked silently in the adjoining study, his fingers flying across a keyboard. He was the most efficient man Minjun knew, a master of information retrieval. An hour later, he appeared in the doorway, his face pale. "Sir," he began, his voice low. "I have something. The girl's name is Amira Collins. Age 9. I cross-referenced missing persons reports and school records. Her mother's registered name is Chloe Collins. The name hung in the air, a physical presence. Chloe. It was her. The confirmation landed not with a crash, but with a slow, sinking dread. Minjun's carefully constructed world, his fortress of emotional detachment, began to crumble, brick by painful brick. Chloe had a daughter, a 9-year-old daughter. The timeline was a perfect, brutal fit. The name Chloe unlocked a Pandora's box of memories Minjun had sealed shut with violence and ambition. He walked to a black lacquer cabinet at the far end of the living room, a piece he hadn't opened in years. Inside, beneath files detailing hostile takeovers and enemy weaknesses, was a small, unassuming wooden box. His fingers, which could authorize the movement of millions with a single keystroke, trembled as he lifted the lid. There was only one item inside, a faded photograph. It was of him and Chloe, taken on a rare weekend away from the city. He was younger, his face not yet hardened into the cold mask of the Mafia boss he would become. He was smiling, a genuine, unguarded smile he barely recognized as his own. Chloe was laughing, her head thrown back, her hand resting on his chest. They were happy. It felt like a scene from another man's life. He remembered her passion, her warmth, the way she fought to see the good in him when he saw only the necessary darkness. He also remembered their fights, the shadows that his life cast over hers. "This world you're building, Minjun," she had pleaded with him one night. "It has no room for light. It will consume you. It will consume us." He hadn't listened. He had seen her fear as a weakness, her pleas as a distraction from his ascent. When she left, he told himself it was for the best. He had chosen power over love, and for 10 years, he had lived with that choice, burying the regrets so deep he almost believed it was gone. But it wasn't gone. It was sleeping on his sofa, wearing an orange dress. She had been pregnant. She had been carrying his child, and she had run away not just from him, but for their daughter. She had run to protect this innocent life from the very poison he embraced. The realization was a physical blow, knocking the air from his lungs. He, the great Minjun, controller of destinies, had been a fool. He had lost the only thing that ever truly mattered because he was too blind, too arrogant to see it. A wave of fury, regret, and a terrifying, unfamiliar tenderness washed over him. He was a father. The thought was both a condemnation and a prayer. His reverie was broken by the urgent return of Mr. Park. The man's usual unflappable demeanor was gone, replaced by genuine alarm. "Sir, there is more. Chloe Collins, she has no official residence. She and the girl have been moving between temporary shelters for the past 6 months. Before that, she was working as a waitress in a small town upstate. She left suddenly. There are whispers, digital footprints of inquiries. She was trying to sell a painting, an early work of hers. It seems she was being pursued." Minjun's blood ran cold. Pursued by whom? Mr. Park hesitated, swiping through the information on his tablet. The inquiries about the painting lead back to a shell corporation. One that I recognize. It is a front for Chairman Kwan. The name landed in the room with the force of a physical strike. Chairman Quan, an older, more traditional rival. A venomous snake who had long resented Minjun's modern, corporate approach to their illicit world. Quan was a man who dealt in cruelty and leverage, a predator who sniffed out weakness like a shark smells blood in the water. Chloe, desperate for money, must have tried to sell a piece of her art, not realizing its provenance could be traced. Quan, ever the opportunist, would have seen the connection to Minjun immediately. He would have hunted her down, not for the painting, but for the story behind it, for the leverage it represented. And now he knew about Amira. The ringing of a burner phone on the marble coffee table sliced through the tension. It was a line only a handful of people in the world had access to. Minjun answered, his voice dropping to a lethal calm. The voice on the other end was smooth, oily, and laced with false pleasantries. It was Quan. Minjun, the chairman purred. I hear you have found a lost item. A very precious, very delicate little piece of art. It is a dangerous world for such things to be left unattended. The threat was unmistakable, wrapped in a thin veneer of civility. Quan knew. He was announcing that he held all the cards. He believed he had found the one chink in Minjun's armor. Minjun felt a rage unlike anything he had ever known. It was not the cold, calculating anger of a business rival. It was a primal, white-hot fury. The protective instinct of a father. Quan had miscalculated. He thought he had found a weakness to exploit. He had no idea he had just armed a bomb. Name your location, Minjun said, his voice a low growl. An hour. He ended the call before Quan could reply. He turned to Mr. Park. Find Chloe. Use every resource. I want her found and secured within the hour. No one touches her. No 1 inch, Mr. Park, seeing the terrifying new fire in his boss's eyes, simply nodded and vanished to carry out the order. Minjun walked over to the sofa and looked down at the sleeping Amira, her face peaceful and innocent of the storm gathering around her. He reached out and gently brushed a stray braid from her forehead. In that moment, his entire world reoriented. The shipping concerns, the stock prices, the territories, it all turned to dust. The only thing that mattered was this child. He arranged the meeting at a neutral location, a vast, empty warehouse on the industrial waterfront, a place where countless brutal negotiations had taken place. When he arrived, Quan was already there, flanked by his own men, a smug, confident smirk on his face. Minjun, Quan began, spreading his hands expansively. There is no need for unpleasantness. We are men of business. A merger has been on the table for years. Your logistics, my connections. Together, we would be untouchable. All I ask is a sign of good faith, a transfer of certain assets, and, of course, the safe return of the collateral. He gestured vaguely, as if discussing a piece of cargo. He saw Amira as a bargaining chip, an asset, the same way Minjun might have seen her just 24 hours ago. There will be no merger, Minjun stated, his voice flat and dead. Quan's smirk faltered. Be reasonable. A child is a liability in our world. A daughter, even one you did not know you had, can be used against you forever. I am offering you a clean slate. Give her to me. I will ensure she is relocated. Far away. You can go back to your life. Minjun took a step forward, the air crackling around him. You are mistaken, he said, his voice dropping to a whisper that was more terrifying than any shout. She is not a liability. She is the only asset that matters. You did not find my weakness, Quan. You found my reason. And for threatening my reason, there is no negotiation. There is only a response. The war was swift and merciless. It was not a war for territory or profit. It was an extermination. Minjun unleashed the full, terrifying force of his organization, not with the cold calculus of a mafia boss, but with the focused rage of a father protecting his child. He dismantled Quan's empire from the inside out. Financial accounts were drained, key lieutenants were turned or neutralized, and shipments were intercepted. He used Quan's own methods against him, leveraging every secret, every weakness he had spent years cataloging. Within 48 hours, Chairman Quan's reign was over. He was a man with no money, no power, and no allies. Minjun left him alive, but broken, a fate worse than death in their world. During the storm, Mr. Park had succeeded in his own mission. He located Chloe, finding her huddled in a small, rundown motel on the outskirts of the city, terrified and expecting Kwan's men at any moment. When Minjun arrived, the reunion was thick with a decade of unspoken words. Chloe stared at him, her eyes filled with fear, regret, and a flicker of the old love he remembered. "I ran to protect her," she whispered, her voice trembling. "I knew what this world does to people, Minjun. I didn't want it to touch her. I never wanted to tell you because I knew it would put you both in danger. You were right to run from me," he said, his own voice heavy with a guilt that felt like a physical weight. "But you will never have to run again." He brought her back to the penthouse, where Amira, who had been cared for by a gentle housekeeper Mr. Park had hired, was waiting. The moment Amira saw her mother, she ran into her arms, and the two clung to each other, a portrait of pure, unadulterated love. Minjun watched from a distance, an outsider looking in on a world he had almost destroyed. He saw Chloe explain to Amira, in simple, careful terms, that he was her father, a man who had gotten lost but was now here to help them. Amira looked over at him, her expression not of confusion, but of simple acceptance, as if she had known all along. The weeks that followed were a quiet revolution. The cold, sterile penthouse slowly began to transform. A bright pink backpack appeared by the door. Colorful drawings, mostly of a smiling stick-figure family, were taped to the billion-dollar refrigerator. The silence was replaced by the sound of a child's laughter and the low murmur of conversation between Minjun and Chloe as they navigated the fragile, complicated path back to each other. Minjun found his priorities shifting with a force that stunned him. He delegated the daily operations of his empire to a trusted council led by Mr. Park, pulling back from the front lines. He spent his mornings not in boardrooms, but sitting at the kitchen island, watching Amira meticulously eat her cereal. He learned about her favorite color, orange, her favorite animal, a giraffe, and her fear of thunderstorms. These small, insignificant details became more valuable to him than any stock portfolio. He was rediscovering a part of himself he thought had died, a capacity for warmth and gentleness he had mistaken for weakness. One evening, he found Amira at the large dining table, a box of crayons spread out before her. He sat down beside her, the first time he had ever done so without a business pretense. She was drawing a picture of the three of them, standing in front of a house with a ridiculously large sun smiling down. "This is our family," she announced, holding it up for him to see. He looked at the simple drawing, at the joy in his daughter's eyes, and felt a profound, overwhelming sense of peace. Later that night, as Chloe and Amira slept, he stood by the vast window, looking out at the glittering city. It no longer looked like a kingdom to be conquered. It was just a place, a backdrop to the real world, the one that now existed within these walls. The next evening, dinner was not a formal affair. It was pizza, eaten at the coffee table. Amira looked up at him, a smear of tomato sauce on her cheek. "Can I eat with you, Dad?" she asked, her voice playful, echoing her first words to him. He smiled, a true, genuine smile that reached his eyes. "Always," he replied, his voice thick with emotion. The Korean Mafia boss was gone, replaced by a father. And for the first time in his life, he was truly, completely rich.